Family is a fundamental area for women. Family relationships are key to holiness, and not only for the women, but for all the persons of the family. I would now like to ask Professor Gabriella Gambino, Undersecretary of the Dicastery for the Laity, Family, and Life, this question.
Da parte della Chiesa.
How is holiness in the family understood by the Church? How has the role of women as bride and mother been manifested in maturing ways of holiness within family in the most recent history of the Church? Thank you.
Grazie, buonasera a tutti.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, I must say.
Predicate sempre il Vangelo e se fosse
Always preach the
necessario
gospel,
anche con le
and if
parole.
necessary, also with words.
Quanta forza evangelizzatrice scaturisce da questo insegnamento
How much
riportato
power
nelle testimonianze
evangelization
epocali?
flows
Quanta
from this
potenza
teaching reported
nella
in the
storia
Franciscan
dell'uomo per
sources?
lasciarci trasformare da Dio
How
e
much power in
trasformare
this
ogni
admonition to
momento
allow
della nostra
ourselves
storia
to be
personale.
transformed by God to the point of having
Se
Him
la
live
santità è tanto
in our earthly
potente,
personal history?
scaturisce da un cuore innamorato e
If holiness
affidato
is so
a Dio,
powerful when it flows from a
quanto
heart
più può
in love
esse
and entrusted
scaturire
to
da
God,
due cuori,
how much
innamorati
more
tra
so
loro,
if it
che
flows
si
from two
affidano
hearts
a
in love
Dio
with each other,
e lo fanno respirare
entrusting
ogni
themselves to God
stagione.
and letting
Un
Him
amore
breathe in
nuziale,
their love,
come quello
a
trinitario,
nuptial love, like the
capace di
Trinitarian
svilupparsi
love,
dai coniugi ai
capable of
figli e
expanding
dalla
from
famiglia
spouses
al
to
mondo.
children and from the
Nella
family
storia
to
della
the world.
Chiesa tanti uomini e tante donne hanno vissuto una santità
In the history of
esemplare
the Church, so
esattamente
many
come
men
Maria.
and women have lived a holiness
Martirologio
exemplary in the sacrament of
porta
marriage.
innumerevoli riferimenti a sposi santi, o
The
meglio,
Roman
a santi sposati.
excuse me,
Infatti non
the
si può
Roman
non
Martyrology
memorare,
contains
se nella
countless
maggioranza
references
dei
to holy
casi la
spouses.
loro memoria nel calendario liturgico si ha
Indeed,
tutt'oggi
one cannot
limitata
fail
a
to
pochi
know that in most
segnalati,
cases,
come
their
quando
memory in the
si
liturgical
ripete una
calendar is to
peregrinazione.
this day remembered on separate dates, as in the case of Saint Gregory the Elder of Nazianzus, who was converted to Christianity by his wife, Saint Nonna. Their three children all became saints as well. Or as in the case of Joachim and Anne, whose liturgical feast was unified by Pope Gregory XII in 1584, but whose memory, even in popular worship, remains distinct. What had always characterized the sanctity of their spouses were the individual heroic virtues, men and women who, however, in their state of married life, had lived an exemplary existence, going as far as martyrdom in many cases. But in the 20th century, renewed theological reflection on marriage led the Church to reflect on the possibility that the conjugal state could itself be the foundation for a holiness of two. I quote in this regard the words of John Paul II in Terzo Millennio Adveniente, quote, in a special way, efforts should be made for the recognition of the herosity of the virtues of men and women who have realized their Christian vocation in marriage. Convinced as we are that even in such a state, there is no lacking fruits of holiness, we feel the need to find the most appropriate ways to verify them and propose them to the whole church as a model and spur for other Christian spouses. End quote. Indeed, the reflection I wish to offer to you is to try to take a step beyond the more traditional thought of holiness as an individual call. It is rather to think about the holiness of spouses and of women in particular in their specific vocation, conjugal and familial, as wife and mother, not alone, but in the fullness of a complementarity and reciprocity with her spouse, capable of bringing out in the church's eyes the strength of the nuptial sacrament. Therefore, and for the avoidance of misunderstanding, not because her personal holiness is not meritorious in itself, but because it is expressed also and specifically in this sacramental spousal identity. The last four pontiffs, Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis, have spoken to the Church about the specific vocation of spouses to holiness. Christian spouses help each other to achieve holiness in married life. Children also contribute to the sanctification of the parents. From Christ through the Church, marriage and the family receive the grace of the Holy Spirit to bear witness to the gospel of God's love. This means that the family, the whole family, assumed in God's love, constantly nourished, sustained, and enriched by the power of Christ, can be led to open its heart to God. It is a privileged place to allow the Lord to manifest Himself in the interweaving of relationships. And spouses, in particular, by virtue of grace, can truly experience the presence of Christ in an ordinary life corroborated by the sacrament. Ordinary people engage in work with children, afflicted at times by immense poverty and suffering, but who in whatever circumstances succeeded, like Louise and Céline Martin, canonized in 2015 by Francis, are an example of how holiness of women, of mothers, is a walking together to heaven. Today, young people struggle to understand the value of marriage as a bond, and fewer are getting married. It is even more difficult for them to think of marriage as a way to holiness too. Yet, I believe that the time has come in the church to start talking in an organic and systematic way about marriage as a vocation, a call to walk path of holiness together in the one sacrament of marriage, in the which, as is written in the Conciliar Constitution Gaudium et Spes, quote, Christian spouses are corroborated and almost consecrated, end quote. This is number 48 of Gaudium et Spes. The purpose of this gift is that spouses are led to God and are helped in strengthening carrying out the sublime mission of father and mother. It is precisely within the framework of the conjugal relationship that in the recent history of the Church, some distinguished number of women who, by taking their vocation seriously and to the fullest extent, have manifested the strength of the female role in marriage and family, becoming the driving force behind a contagious holiness within their family unit. Such is the case of Daphros, married to Cyprian Rugamba, who died martyrs in Rwanda in 1994, with 6 of their 7 children and a granddaughter. Daphros, humiliated, publicly betrayed, and unjustly disowned by her husband, by the power of prayer, love, and generosity, manages to lead him to conversion, their courage to ask her forgiveness, and an unwavering, even to martyrdom together. I can also think of Maria Beltram Quattrocchi, who was able to give the Church the extraordinary image of warp and weft to explain to us in what way, by opening themselves to grace, spouses can become for each other the instruments of God's action. Quote, thus is marriage, thread by thread, woven into God, one with the other, without solution, continuously, never until eternity. Compact luck, molded into one material, willed by God, unbreakable. End quote. This quote is from Gaudium et Spes number 141. Beltram Quattrocchi, the Bernardini, the Amendoleggian in Italy, the Alvira and the Ortiz in Spain, the Takashi in Japan, the Rugamba in Rwanda, and many others are examples of how marriage is not a romantic and perfect ideal to be achieved, but a love story full of obstacles, but an adventure, always in the making, in which Christ can work great things when he finds room in their hearts. They tell us with the gentleness and bursting power of witness that every family can walk its own path of holiness if we are aware that we cannot save ourselves alone, but rather in the web of relationships in which we're embedded. The Martins, for example, were able to raise their daughters by the example of a living faith. And this can happen even in the most complex and fragile family context of the 21st century, where the challenge is a willingness to constantly work on oneself, trusting God's grace with the sacraments, prayer, love, and service to neighbor. Holiness, in other words, consists in interweaving the horizontal and the vertical dimension of our family life, so that starting from things very much practical, our gaze, instead of retreating into itself, is led up to heaven, making us capable of discernment, listening, of caring for the little ones, and of those in need around us. Someone has described the contemporary family as an imperfect choreography, fragile, but nevertheless a movement, almost a dance, which is the essence of life. In the family, where some ties are irrevocable and not chosen, I am thinking of being fathers, mothers, and children, and the roles of kinship that are generated by marriage. We celebrate otherness, labors, imperfection, and the discovery of life. And this movement generates so many opportunities for holiness. In today's Congress that we're celebrating today, who knows how many women passionate and in love with their spousal vocation, their educational role, and their motherhood walk a daily path of holiness alongside their man in reciprocity, but increasingly also alone in social contexts where fatherhood is often fugitive. How many women's families survive today, especially in the poorest geographical locations on the planet, where heroic mothers, with trust and passionate love, give themselves to save and preserve family ties, to provide a future for their children, to show them that despite injustices, we were generated to weave bonds of love, to generate others beside ourselves to true life, the one that knows how to find the meaning of everything, because it entrusts itself to God. Because of him, it surrenders one's pain, joys, labors, commitment. As Pope Francis says, the family nowadays is a real challenge for parents to raise their children. The family is a domestic church where things have a meaning because they are a gift that God entrusts to us to make them bear fruit, where we learn that if something is taken from us, it is to receive an even greater gift, where we mothers wish for our children to find happiness by learning to recognize the gifts that life places in their path. This is the holy to which we are called in our homes. Even in those that today are wiped out by war, destroyed homes, among whose rubble brave mothers, cemented by an unshakable faith, strive to protect the little ones, the elderly and the sick, and to rebuild with solidarity the hope of a return to peace. Women, who in the midst of so much devastation and death understand, like beacons of light in the dark, that even in despair, we must seek what does not die. Takashi Nagai wrote this in Japan after Midori, his wife, had been pulverized by the second atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. A holy family in wartime, like who knows how many families in the world still today, battered by senseless wars, where family ties know how to take on the fragility of others, and the good becomes truly common. These are the signs of holiness that mature among family relationships, and the love that arises between men and women, between parents and children. It is in the strength of indissoluble bonds that matures the awareness that what passes cannot sanctify, for only what is rooted in the eternal is lasting and makes one happy. In the family, and thus I conclude, there are conditions for striving for holiness together, husband and wife, parents and children, as in a rope line, with other families, other children, many lonely elderly people, and especially men and women who, strong in God's love, know how to pour out into the world their witness of trust in human beings, of hope in a different and better tomorrow. Women who, even with eyes full of pain and wounds, know how to faithfully spread that Christian love that smacks of true compassion and authentic dignity. Thank you so much.